It's no secret that Europe has seen a surge in Islamic immigration in the last few decades. Everyone has also come to the shared consensus that European politicians are proclaiming support for multiculturalism and acting upon the support they have for the notion. However, people tend to become divided over the question, is multiculturalism in Europe working? Has multiculturalism worked in the past? Now, I'm probably going to get flack for this video's perceived Eurocentric bias. Indeed, this video will focus largely on Europe, mainly because that's where we have seen the complete and utter collapse of the post-war doctrine that tells us we, as communities, can live side by side, even if our cultures, ethnicities, and languages are different. Well, I'd like to debunk this naive doctrine by first looking at the failure of multiculturalism in Yugoslavia, followed by the complete failure to integrate from Islamic communities in Europe. Now, I won't spend a very long time discussing the ex-Yugoslav nations, but it is very important to bring this up. After all, the collapse of Yugoslavia shows the desire every ethnic and cultural group has for their own nation-state. Before World War II, there were major tensions in Yugoslavia. It seemed that every region of that nation wanted their own nation-state, especially rebellious little Serbia. Not that anything is wrong with that, of course. It's only natural for any ethnic and cultural groups to desire their own nation-state. Yugoslavia collapsed in 1991, largely because of these tensions. Frankly, the Croats, Albanians, Serbs, Bosniaks, all these groups, they did not want to live as one nation. There was a man named Josip Broz Tito, who was admittedly a benevolent dictator that kept Yugoslavia from descending into ethnic and sectarian violence. He attempted to maintain a firm grip on his country until his death in 1980. As he was the only man keeping the nation from descending into sheer genocide, the Yugoslav Wars erupted in 1991 because of the hatred that was directed at Yugoslavia from South Slavic groups. Croatia declared independence in 1991, as did Slovenia. Slovenia was largely spared the particularly brutal war that followed, but Croatia was not. Within months, the first president of Croatia essentially declared a war on the Serbs and was found guilty of war crimes after his death. 20,000 people died as a result of these war crimes, but the Yugoslav Wars were far, far from over. In 1992, a war broke out between Bosnia and Serbia, and Serbia was found guilty of encouraging the ethnic cleansing of Bosnians. There were many other ethnic wars that lasted until 1991 just in the Balkan Peninsula. At the end of the war, 140,000 people had died. Today, the Balkan Peninsula is relatively peaceful, given the fact that most ethnic groups now have their own nation-state, with the exception of Kosovo, which some recognize as independent, but some don't. Now, what I've just discussed is a super sensitive topic for many people in the Balkan region. And I'd like to stress the fact that I am not accusing all Bosniaks, Serbs, Croatians, etc. of war crimes and genocide. A small percentage of people from all these ethnic groups actually committed any war crimes or were involved in the war at all. So if you're from Bosnia or Serbia, Croatia, Albania, I cannot stress enough that I am not accusing you or your ancestors of genocide and war crimes. Now, Western Europe, the fun topic. Yes, multiculturalism is failing in Western Europe, and call me a lunatic, but we're beginning to see a real clash of cultures here. Let's start with some basic background information. Many Western European nations have significant vocal Muslim minorities. Everyone admits that. I mean, France is nearly 10% Muslim, the Netherlands 7%, UK almost 7%, and while these numbers don't sound very big, we have to take into account the large cities in these nations. Cities like Marseille in France are 35% Muslim, Malmö in Sweden 20%, Rotterdam in the Netherlands 25%, and so on and so forth. By 2030, some of these cities will have a majority of Muslims. This, of course, leads to extreme tensions that are only worsening. Now, I'm about to talk about the failure to integrate in Europe from the Islamic community, and again, I'd like to point out that I'm not accusing all Muslims in Europe of failing to integrate. I really try to stray away from painting all groups of people with a broad brush. That's intellectually dishonest. Now, I could go on and on about the various terrorist attacks directed at cartoonists, infidels, but also the severe anti-gay and anti-Semitic violence perpetrated by the Muslim community in Europe. The Jewish and gay communities are leaving cities like Malmö and Marseille and Rotterdam in flocks. I mean, gays are getting beat up in the streets in some of these cities. And I shit you not, some very segregated neighborhoods of Sweden, France, and the UK are trying to implement Sharia law. They harass and even use physical violence to get people to adhere to this disgusting, misogynist, homophobic, downright racist legal code. Hell, Stockholm identified a list of dozens of neighborhoods that are literal no-go zones for non-Muslims. This doesn't mean that if you're non-Muslim, you're barred from entering. It just means that if you do enter, you might get shot. Now, these aren't just some facts that I've pulled out of my ass. The polls agree with me. 65% of Muslims in Europe believe that Islam is the only true religion. 72% believe that the West is totally degenerate. 63% of Muslims in Europe claim to have more respect for religious laws than secular ones. 57% refuse to talk to homosexuals, etc., etc. Then you have the gang wars and the rapes. The Nordic countries in particular have experienced a rape crisis since the arrival of Muslims. 40 years ago, Sweden was one of the safest, if not the safest country in the entire world. Since then, violent crime has risen by 300%, and rapes by 1,472%. I probably stuttered when I said that number. Why? Because it's so astronomical. 1,472%. Ugh. Sweden has the second highest rape rate in the world. Second only to Lesotho. So, let's give a round of applause for Sweden, guys. Now, we have to remember where these people come from. Theocratic, underdeveloped countries with Sharia law and a low average IQ. If you haven't watched my video on IQ, I'd highly recommend it. In short, I'm fine with Western immigrants. If someone from Canada wants to go to the UK, let them. I mean, so long as they don't have a criminal record. But we need to halt Islamic immigration to Europe immediately. Thankfully, many politicians in Europe and the populace of Europe are waking up. Marine Le Pen, a staunch critic of multiculturalism, the EU, and Islam, may become the next French president. The United Kingdom Independence Party advocates for an end to multiculturalism, and they're polling at 15% and rising. Similar parties like the Danish People's Party, the Party for Freedom in the Netherlands, and Lega Nord in Italy are polling near 20 to 25% in some polls. Europe is beginning to wake up. Maybe it's not too late for Western civilization. I hope you enjoyed this video.